Peace, everyone. We're about to start the reading tonight. Just wanted to hop on, kind of introduce the paper a little bit. The paper's called Systematic Nationalism, a Legitimate Strategy for National Selfhood. It's written by the author Molefi Kete Asante. You guys should be familiar with that name, especially if you're familiar with the word Afrocentricity. Tonight we're going to be talking about, in this paper, we're going to be talking about how your liberation efforts, your liberation is derived from your social and historical context, right? So anything you adhere to should come from you, should come of your history, your past, right? And if you're not doing that, then whatever it is you're adhering to will betray you because it is not for you, right? So we're going to be talking about tonight. We'll be back right after these messages.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Goku, here today with another paper. Before we get into the paper, though, I want to remind you guys that this show, the Bitter Medicine Podcast, is part of a podcast network. There are other shows on the network you should be tuning into.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys are tuning into those other shows on the network. Check out the Harsh Reality Podcast's most recent 2 episodes. One is the Present series. He's interviewing the revolutionary matron from the Learning Curve podcast. And then they did their regular show with him, El Miguel, and Ra in the background. So you guys check it out. Good conversation. All right, check that out. Before I get into the paper, one last thing. Just want to remind you guys that tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm hosting a Twitter space, of course, on Twitter. And the topic that I decided to present, is this right here. Twitter truncated the title, but it's a play off this Build Back Better. My topic for my Twitter space tomorrow night will be Build Black Better. And it's about code of conduct, right? We've heard, especially in the conscious community, especially a few years ago, there was all this code talk, code. And that's how a lot of people became familiar with Neely Fuller and stuff like that, right? And so, I think Neely Fuller calls it the stops, the things to stop doing, right? However you want to look at it, the Black Panthers had a code as well. The BLA had a code, and Kwame Nkrumah has a code even that we can all discuss tomorrow. Let's reconstruct a code or construct a code that we want to see all of our peoples kind of follow going forward. Because like we talked about a few weeks ago, you have to determine what your cultural output is going to be. And you have to make it a part of the culture, part of the things that we reiterate in our lives, right? You have to do that, right? So let's talk about, you know, examples of codes from the past and the things that can work still and can't work, and the things that we need to include because we're in a new technological time from a lot of those other codes in the past. So let's come through. Let's have that conversation. All right. So that's what the Spaces is about tomorrow. Let's get into the reading tonight. I just want to thank everyone who's here. Listen, see the Harsh Rally podcast is here, saying Black Power to you too. Again, you guys make sure to check out those last 2 episodes of the Harsh Rally podcast. The pro-Black perspective is here as well, saying we in here. Appreciate you guys for coming through. All right. So, Systematic Nationalism, a legitimate strategy for national selfhood by Molefi Kete Asante. The contemporary Marxist's credo these days is based upon historically incorrect perceptions of American society and consequently affords no historically or experientially derived methods for us. Their belief in the inherent integrity of the working class is contradictory to our history in America. Furthermore, the current critiques of Pan-Africanism and nationalism by Black Marxists are simplistic formulas derived from the 1860s. In an attempt to attack African cultural, political, and economic unity at home and abroad, they have seriously distorted the political configuration of contemporary society and failed to account for the historically correct analysis of leading national theoreticians. Systematic nationalists, as opposed to naive nationalists, have also considered Pan-Africanism without socialism to be self-defeating, because otherwise the exploitation of the people would simply continue at the hands of Black exploitators. Thus, exploitation in any form by any type of economic order is vehemently denounced. What is disturbing, however, is that the Marxists believe that in order to achieve cultural and political solidarity among Black people, there has to be complete unification of the world's working class. Not only is this a naive Marxist view, it is a view which has been roundly criticized for its inaccuracies. You know, that's one of the things, you don't really hear me talking about these economic systems, because a long time ago, I kind of recognized the setup. Like, if you really peep Marxism is like a blueprint for oppression, right? If you really peep what Marxism pushes, it's like a blueprint for oppression. He's pushing his quote unquote class contradiction, when as this paper I'm sure is going to put out, we are more concerned with a race contradiction in society. But the thing about Marxism, just to talk about that, why I say it's a setup. To me, all Marx did was report to the white elite that, hey, your system is going to have a problem if you continue. These other white folks are going to get pissed off, and they're going to have an uprising, right? But that didn't have us in mind, right? Regardless to whatever he's talking about, we're still in the category of the oppressed. And so all that will happen will be white folks will fight, and if you kept things as they were, right, and you elites will suffer. It was a warning call to me, to the elites, right? But I digress. At least nationalists have articulated clear and profound views in the last 10 years. New works by Karenga and Madhubuti have sparked a lively debate on the nationalist question, but more appropriately, they have continued the activist tradition. However, the triumvirate of Marx, Lenin, Stalin has more validity in contemporary Afro-American Marxist thinking than Walker, Garvey, Muhammad, because the Marxists are not conscious of the intellectual and activist postures derived from our history. Marx, Walker, Garvey, Muhammad. Okay. This article contends that the historically correct path for national selfhood has always been systematic nationalism. In effect, systematic nationalists believe that any ideology for people's liberation must be derived from their social and historical context. This is not to say that no ideas from other theories or theories are acceptable. Certainly, nationalism must be built upon the cardinal truth principles of political behavior expressed in African, Eastern, and Western philosophies. Our cultural difference, however, must be in our history, that is, in what can be considered truth for us. Marxism is a method, systemic nationalism is a method. One method is designed to deal with class contradictions, another speaks to race as a contradiction. Thus, the contributions of Marxism cannot be ignored. They must be placed in context. The systematic nationalist position is clear. The fundamental contradiction in American society is racism. If there is one fact on which blacks have historically been united, it is the reality of race in American society. Even Clark, the integrationist, saw accurately in Dark Ghetto the pervasiveness of racism, saying it has permeated the whole society. W.E.B. Du Bois, America's most prolific intellectual and a socialist, understood that socialist fraternity could not exist while human brotherhood was still a mockery. Du Bois did not allow his method to interfere with his nationalism or his Pan-Africanism. This was also true of Padmore. It is from racism as the fundamental contradiction that our most pressing political and social issues are derived. Whether we are discussing jobs, education, welfare, or foreign affairs, racism is a factor. Systematic nationalists understand and have always admitted that it is not the only contradiction, it is the principal contradiction for African Americans. A racially homogeneous capitalist nation would produce sharper economic contradictions than the United States. The African population within the American society acts as a buffer between what would conceivably be revolutionary working classes of whites and the capitalist classes, according to orthodox Marxism. Such a cleavage, pragmatic and operative for a working class revolution, is nearly obliterated by the presence of 30 million blacks who are the victims of a psychosocial rage called racism. The fact that Africans are disproportionately represented in the working class is also derived from racism. This has to be understood as a uniquely American situation. Applications of a methodological analysis developed under circumstances other than the American society must come under extreme review. To take Guinea, Somalia, or China as examples for the liberations of Africans in America is a distortion. Cuba itself has found that the revolution has not eradicated racism. Governments find it easier to manage economies than to manage racism. Governments find it easier to manage economies than to manage racism. Marxists are content to find refuge in the European past and in an organizational hierarchy ready-made for the platform, rather than in the creative practice of struggle based upon our own historical content. Book Chin in Post-Scarcity Anarchism, 1971, was at least correct in his analysis of Marxism as a conservative ideology, because the authoritarian leader and hierarchy replaced the patriarch and school bureaucracy. The discipline of the movement replaces the discipline of bourgeoisie society. The authoritarian code of political obedience replaces the state. The credo of proletarian morality replaces the mores of puritanism and work. The truth of the matter is that nationalist thought has not been as structured as it should have been. Thus, brothers and sisters looking for a unified approach to revolutionary struggle have found Marxism easier to argue. The development of a systematic nationalism born in African American history provides an alternative strategy for liberation. The bankruptcy peddled by Marxists lacks the necessary revolutionary vision to see the intricacies of racist capitalism in American society. Systematic nationalism seeks freedom from Marxist races as well as capitalist races. So yeah, that's a critique. Systematic nationalism seeks freedom from Marxist races as well as capitalist races. Right? You guys are hearing my voice right now live. Make sure you hit the like button. Right? I see Jonelle has said good evening. And Tito District says peace, y'all. Y'all say what's up to the ladies, Jonelle and Tito District. Pro Black Perspective says attacking Marxists. Like this paper already. Yeah, so make sure you guys hit the like button. Make sure you share the content and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Again, don't forget Twitter Spaces tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're talking building black better, and we're saying that in regards to creating a code of conduct to live by going forward. To continue, systematic nationalism does not destroy the validity of Marxism as a critique of industrial capitalism in the 19th century. It transcends Marxism as a critique for liberation struggles by minority people within imperialist nations. This fact has always been understood by classical thinkers such as Garvey and Malcolm X. Marxist analysis of class struggle was both appropriate and real for the 19th century. However, as even the black Marxists will admit, the traditional class struggle simply readjusts and strengthens the capitalist system by modifying wages, labor time, fringe benefits, and employment and position mobility. These are precisely the factors which work against the romantic notion of white and black workers in America leading a socialist revolution. If socialism is ever achieved in the American society, it will be through systematic nationalism, not a collective of multiracial workers. White industrial workers who earn $10 and $12 per hour find little to share with a brother or sister who cannot get a job because of racist oppression expressed in poor education, substandard housing, inadequate health care, and a defeatist attitude towards life. The white worker, indeed even the anti-black black worker who earns $12 an hour, has difficulty sympathizing with a street corner brother who suffers from racist oppression. The reality of this fact alone shows the impoverished nature of a proletarian revolution in contemporary America. There are no revolutionary implications for America in traditional Marxist class conflict. In fact, conflict may be orchestrated to purge the system of radicals. Any casual analysis of the American labor scene will show that the unions, the organizations of the working classes, have become a part of the capitalist monopoly system. Workers in contemporary America are not serfs, indentured servants, and overworked Russian peasants. They are an incorporated part of the general capitalist governors of the estate, demonstrating the same disdain for the poor, blacks, and women. It is in this context that Marxism shows itself to be most bankrupt as a liberating doctrine for African Americans. Although various other conflicts do exist in the capitalist estate, they are pretty much handicapped by the rich capitalists and rich unionists sitting down to work out their conflicts. Systematic nationalism has no illusions about the racism which exist in the American society. Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and Elijah Muhammad proclaimed it in their pioneering analyses. They began in a fragmented way to build a foundation for systematic nationalism. Their perspectives, informed by our history, are more valuable to us than those of Marx or Engels. We do not claim their wisdom or correctness merely on skin criterion, but rather because their analysis of the black condition in America were hampered out on the anvil of historical experience. We get to a part of the paper called Three Assumptions. All theoretical arguments of systematic nationalism flow from three overarching assumptions. Racism is the principal contradiction in non-homogeneous industrial societies. 2, racism is a permanent psychosocial reality in non-homogeneous industrial societies. And 3, out-migration of large populations of minorities is impracticable. According to systemic nationalism, racism will exist in any non-homogeneous industrial society, whether the economics is capital or social. Okay. History affords no example where this has not been the case. Thus, the systematic nationalist takes this position as a given. Furthermore, racism is a permanent psychosocial reality in non-homogeneous industrial societies. Changes in class conditions or religions do not obliterate the psychosocial permanence of racism. The presence of a minority population periodically engenders prejudice and discrimination. Yet the out-migration of large minority populations is impracticable. African Americans will remain in the United States. So is this just is Asante just showing that his underlying fundamental analysis of Africans in America is that you're just not going to move them. They're going to cling to this place, right? Why is it impractical for large migrations of Africans out of Babylon? Is he admitting here he fundamentally understands you're not getting folks to leave America? You know? Yet the out-migration of a large minority population is impracticable. African Americans will remain in the United States, full stop. Systematic nationalists see our struggle in terms of the three principal assumptions mentioned above. Garvey saw racism as the principal contradiction in American society and articulated a black nationalism which would drive fear out of the minds of the people. Garvey's movement, contrary to some beliefs, was well organized. Consistent with later nationalist thinking, Garvey imposed strict discipline, taught pride and self-respect, encouraged independence from the white society, and created unifying symbols. Right? So again, tomorrow night's Twitter space, come through. Let's talk about this self-respect and discipline by way of this code. To continue, unlike Elijah Muhammad, Garvey planned a Back to Africa movement because Africans would never be free in America. Nationalism for him was a technique to be utilized to liberate blacks from America. Hard thinking had left him in the impracticable position of demanding that Africans be allowed to return to Africa. It was impracticable in the first quarter of the 20th century because blacks who were prepared to support nationalism were not as prepared to support emigration to the continent. Second, the cost was prohibitive. And third, as Garvey discovered, we did not have the equipment capabilities at the time necessary for transporting large numbers of people over long distances within a short period of time comfortably. Thus, the physical migration which he preached had to be spiritual migration for the vast majority of his followers. So, is this still the case now? Is this still the case? And does it? And if it is still the case, does it have to still be the case? Right? Garvey, as a messenger, had struck the bell of nationalism like no other black person in the Americas. What he taught in his message would be learned, modified, and applied by those who came after it. Elijah Muhammad's nationalism was complex and intricate. Starting from the same base as did Garvey, Muhammad saw racism as a permanent psychosocial reality in America. Nevertheless, he did not counsel Africans to run to Africa. His realistic appraisal of the impracticability of back to Africa gave him enormous credibility in the light of the history of Garvey's movement a few years earlier. Thus, Muhammad never promised to take anyone to Africa. According to Muhammad, Africans had as much right to the land as did Europeans. Therefore, nationalism, as expressed by the messenger, Elijah Muhammad, depended upon securing land in America for the black nation. The base of his nationalist ideology, like that of Garvey, was economic development. Systematic nationalism accepts economic development as a major tenet, but argues that spiritual conquest precedes either economic or spiritual conquest. That's an interesting thought. Right? If the spirit ain't in it, then, the spirit ain't in it, how can your economics work? Pro-black perspective said peace to the ladies, and then he said folk not leaving. Yeah, that's it. Folks ain't leaving. Malcolm X articulated the sentiments of nationalism, but was never permitted to develop the structure upon which those sentiments were to rest. Thus, the Marxists who openly attack nationalism have been setting up ducks and bowling them over. They have not yet appreciated the classical nationalist doctrine understood by every nationalist from Garvey to Karenga, and even hinted at in the white scholar Wilhelm's Who Needs the Negro? Racism is for real. Systematic nationalism accepts that as a starting point to construct a practical theory to deal with African American life. Karenga calls his brand of systematic nationalism KWAZ. The name may differ, but the method is the same. The method is primarily pragmatics. What we can demonstrate from analysis of history is that our philosophy, stemming from the classical theorists Blyden, Delaney, Turner, Garvey, and Muhammad, is based upon situational demands. Exploited people will eventually do what is necessary to achieve their liberation. Garvey and Muhammad defended pragmatics in the most powerful manner and regularly pointed out the erroneous deviations from the principal assumptions of systematic nationalism. Garvey's views are most profoundly set forth in the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey. Muhammad's views are expressed in the message to the black man. Neither Garvey nor Muhammad stop with a statement of philosophy. They advance philosophical thought by submitting it to practice. In fact, both saw pragmatics as the carrying out of the national consciousness through committed effort to recover identity. Deepening the philosophical interest in pragmatics, Garvey initially, and Muhammad later, advanced science by anticipating in political sociology the discoveries in biology and engineering. Garvey proved that the American cultural and political sphere was a system. In this respect, he anticipated the work to be done by Vaughan, Bertalanffy, and others in systems theory. Garvey made minute observations of the American society, as well as numerous observations of West Indian communities before announcing his discovery. It was not until 1916 that he pronounced the establishment of the UNIA. He had by this time seen the interconnectedness of economics, geography, culture, and the military. Right? He had by this time seen the interconnectedness, economics, geography, culture, and the military. Y'all bring that thought to tomorrow night's spaces. The United States had formed a racist system, and it was impossible to get out of the system anything but detriment to non-white minorities. It was this awareness which caused Garvey to argue vehemently for nationalism. Following Garvey's well-developed philosophy, which was grounded in historical reality, Muhammad carried it to the next level. Incipient in Garvey was cultural consciousness, but it was Muhammad who attempted to reconstruct the past as a basis for a more exact science. With hindsight, we can look back and criticize the constituents of Muhammad's system. But as Abdul Farrakhan once said to me, quote, "The old man's conceptual scheme was perfect," end of quote. Malcolm X first and Farrakhan subsequently took the mantle of national purpose to another level. However, it was Farrakhan who understood the messenger's objective. Malcolm X enriched the political theory and provided new insights into the nationalist rationale, but never lived to develop the cultural component to accompany the political philosophy. It would have been a natural occurrence had he lived. Abdul Farrakhan has moved forward an extension of the doctrine in order to achieve nationalist aims. See, I it's hard for me to read this NOI stuff. While the NOI did practice a group economics within the community, these guys were putting down Africa and Africans. These guys, right, if you look at Muhammad, these guys didn't want to even speak on what was really happening to black folks in that time while the civil rights movement was pushing. So what were they really doing practicing economics in black communities? In the chat, Kilo District says, to the pro-black perspective, true, most black folks are still attached to the idea of America, unfortunately. That's referring to his earlier comment, folk not leaving. Nefere is in the room saying peace. Y'all say peace to Nefere. Thank you, Nefere, for coming through. Pro-black perspective say, yeah, what's with this NOI praise? It's not my cup of tea, man. Nationalists have always responded to the situation which deprived the black person of information. Thus, the theory is data-based. It argues that once you give a black person information about his or her African and American past, you will create a nationalist. It is a theoretical prediction based upon historical data. Correctly understanding the problem is a necessity for a problem solution. Prior to Garvey and Muhammad, nationalism was naive and sentimental. It was not a system. It was the psychological longings and wishings of some very creative and gifted individuals who were tired of discrimination and racism. As Marx and Engels had done for the economically oppressed, Garvey and Muhammad did for the racially oppressed. Again, all right. That is why the systematic nationalist says socialism to deal with black contradictions, nationalism to deal with race contradictions. That is why the systematic nationalist says socialism to deal with class contradictions. Oh, okay. Nationalism to deal with race contradictions. Okay, I follow that. All right. Again, thank you guys for coming out tonight to listen to this broadcast. I appreciate you guys. Classical theory, as propounded by Garvey and Muhammad, explained the root causes of the Africans' dissatisfaction with American society. They refuted the notion advanced by white and white-oriented black theorists that the black person was alienated from American society by demonstrating that blacks had never been a part of that society. Alienation suggests that one has been affiliated. In our historical experience, we affiliated with one another and grew to appreciate our strength. Dissatisfaction existed and exists because we have been unjustly treated, and the time for redress is long past. Political and economic institutions constitute architectonic structures based on American racism. For justice to be done to the black person would mean the redistribution of political and economic wealth. For example, the dismantling of the racist system. Since that is not going to be willingly done, we have to ensure that the various scaffolds of racism do not encapsulate our spirit. So this brings us to the part of the paper that deals with the approach. How are we going to do this? We're going to read this right after this station ID break.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio. Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
What are you going to do? When you figure it out, email us at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. So let's continue this paper. Oh, and by the way, guys, if you look at the top of the chat, pinned to the top of the chat or down in the description, you'll see the link to the KWAZ Radio merch store. By all means, end of the year, purchase a t-shirt. It helps the channel. It helps each show, help out in that way. We appreciate it. Right. In the chat, the pro-black perspective says Elijah Muhammad just sleeping with secretaries and collecting money. Absolutely. Right. What was the economics that they were really practicing? Right. They didn't believe in Africa. They didn't want to get involved in what was going on in the streets. But yet they were opening up all these businesses in black communities, right? Drawing in black customers. What was really going on? Mr. Untouchable is here. What you saying, Mr. Untouchable? In honor of Mr. Untouchable, I'm here sipping on some Appleton myself right now. So shout out to Mr. Untouchable. He says, shout out to my good brethren, Kuku, and blessings to the whole damn chat. I like that. That's a nice entrance right there. All right, y'all say what's up to Mr. Untouchable. Let's continue with the reading. So we had the approach now. Systematic nationalism is not dependent upon geography. In this respect, it departs most sharply from traditional concepts of nationalism. It was impossible for Elijah Muhammad or Malcolm X to conceive of nationalism without land. Their views, while understandable in previous political situations, are not necessarily operative in contemporary societies. Nationalism is a relationship among people with a common heritage and with common expectations. That's a little weak of a definition, but okay. You could have made that much better. The Moluccans of Holland, the Palestinians in the Middle East, the Africans in South Africa, and African Americans in the United States constitute nations to the degree that political and spiritual solidarity is achieved. Land acquisition is merely the ultimate stage of nationalism. Okay. All right. The consummation and crystallization of our aspirations into an organic and systematic instrument for emancipatory politics is the first objective of systematic nationalism. This process is accomplished through historically and culturally determined actions for national expression. Contradicts attempts at national oppression through the exploitative uses of culture, science, religion, and economics. Emancipatory politics is the keystone of nationalistic struggle. It liberates the mind from the duality of marginal existence. Nationalists are therefore capable of functioning in any situation. What is necessary, absolutely necessary, is an attachment to the national idea. Such an attachment is both historically and politically correct. The correctness of systematic nationalism stems from its assault on the twin evils of race and class exploitation. This, however, is not its philosophical grounding. It is rather its activist character. The philosophical base of systematic nationalism must always be emancipatory politics. The response of systematic nationalism to the main components of contemporary American society begins with a realistic analysis of our current condition. American society of the 20th century is a media society. You guys agree with that? Well, yeah, social media, right? Mr. Untouchable says, make sure you use Coke and lemon with that Appleton. Well, I have most of that correct. Just missing one thing that you mentioned there. The response of systematic nationalism to the main components of contemporary American society begins with a realistic analysis of our current condition. American society of the 20th century is a media society, which, yeah, social media, etc. Yeah. This fact alone distinguishes the last quarter of the 20th century from any other era in history. The authority to support this view is overwhelming. Nevertheless, many militant responses, both nationalistic and Marxist, to national exploitation and repression in America have been rooted in pre-media notions. You know, that's a good point made there. Culture, religion, science, and economics are communicative facts. Symbols form societies, symbols integrate societies, and symbols wreck societies. Imagery and rhetoric have played a role in our previous attempts to address national oppression, but never in terms which combine our symbolic and strategic powers. What is the meaning of a nationalist in any venue in society? What responses are symbolic? Which are strategic? What responses are both? Furthermore, the ability to operate nationally, that is, as a nationalist, is not restricted by one's venue. A nationalist is not a nationalist at the mass meeting and not one at the university, church, or United Nations. Such practice is the antithesis of KWAZ, systematic nationalism. Systematic nationalism. As a function of social analysis, it is clear that nationalism is not limited by geography. Emancipatory politics in a highly mobile society such as America or South Africa must operate in every place. However, the symbolic and strategic symbols must reflect the positive elements of systematic nationalism as a relationship between people who express a common origin, struggle, and common aspiration. I like that. Such a systemic method must be applied to every sector of the society. There are 4 areas which must be addressed in any nationalist system. First up is culture. Systematic nationalism defines culture as the creative activity of the people expressing a relationship with nature and each other in a functionally and aesthetically rewarding manner. American culture is generally decadent and base, having little pragmatic or spiritual content. The nationalist rejects the insipid and shallow treatment of culture by most American artists and encourages the creation of morally powerful images, sounds, words, and movements. Right? Don't y'all hear me talking about that on this show all the time? An emphasis on spirit and pragmatism is not a negation of aesthetics, but rather a resurrection of the essence of any true aesthetics. Aesthetics is not determined by a subordinate seer who decides what is beautiful and valuable and what is not. It is determined by that which is most instructive to the people. The musician, choreographer, painter, or other artist who engages in banalities receives the absolute condemnation of the nationalists, just as a Greek organization's Black Pledge is condemned for his nonsense, right? This is right on time. This right here, the way he wrote this. As you know, I just did an episode maybe a week and a half ago, talking about, these Black Greek-led organizations. Just check that out. Systematic nationalism builds upon the historically determined paths of the ancestor artists. The creativity of our artists must be instructed by history. It is necessary for an artist to read history and politics in American society in order to express more authentically the struggle and victory of national expression. Politics must be emancipatory, so culture must also be liberating. Our artists are priests, and their ministry must be nationalistic and conscious. So I shout out to Athrazar, who's in the chat sometimes. Shout out to that brother. The next area is science. Now, by the way, I've talked about all of these things before in this light as well. Right? So it's interesting that they're bringing these points out item by item. In the chat, the Harsh Reality Podcast says to Mr. Untouchable, I'm going to have to write down that recipe. Mr. Untouchable says to the Harsh Reality Podcast, just go easy on it, bro. LOL. Yeah, that Appleton. Boy. Anyhow, let us continue. So we're talking science now. First was culture, now it's science. Science is a structured approach to the solution of practical problems. Systematic nationalism itself is science. All science should derive from praxis. Praxis provides the basis for theory. The idea that theory should precede praxis is erroneous. Theory is refined by praxis, and praxis is perfected by the people's criticism. Science, therefore, is employed for the benefit of the nation. Serious science assumes a role in medicine, technology, economics, literacy, analysis, and nephrology. I was in this upcoming Roman New Year, I might try to get Molefi Asante on the show again. It does not consider unimportant subjects for mere intellectual exercise, which is a waste of human time. Systematic nationalism contends that the scientist must apply his or her skills to problem solving among the people. This is the scientist's first task. Achievement of skills brings with it a nationalistic scientific responsibility for the building of the nation. And the third thing Molefi is talking about here is spirituality. Culture, science, spirituality. Spirituality satisfies the human thirst for fulfillment. Blame it on the Appleton. Systematic nationalism argues that spirituality is necessary and useful. However, we recognize that spirituality is founded upon specific histories from which we are able to draw universal lessons. All spiritual exercises have grown from specific histories. Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Candomblé, Shango, and Maoism have expressed the peculiar conditions of the people to whom they were initially addressed. Universal acceptance of the general principles have come after the acceptance by the nationals. Systematic nationalism seeks to maintain the spirituality which emerges out of our unique history as a symbolic people. I like this point he makes here about all spiritual exercises, because if you might have a chance to break the spell that these Abrahamic religions have on us if you could only get across to the people, listen, this bullshit you're reading here, this is the histories and stories and myths of a people, of a specific people in a specific locations initially. Why would you listen to the shit that they were on? To continue, this view is expressed in varying ways in the writings of Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, and Maulana Karenga. What they all understand is that religion, in its most spiritual sense, is the act of people seeking their own standards of ethics. According to systematic nationalism, those standards can only be found in the people's specific history. As a vanguard people, a people with integrity and spirit, the Afro-Americans must establish spiritual purpose in the world. Do you guys listen have a spiritual purpose? Do you have your own specific spiritual purpose that you abide by? Right? In the chat, Mr. Untouchable says, I think Erykah Badu and Earth, Wind, and Fire was trying to incorporate African culture in the music. Yeah, I mean, that's that's in more recent years. You could go back further and you could find that African culture in blues music. Right? Go back and listen to some old blues music. The Hot Shotty podcast says to Mr. Untouchable, Erykah talking that 5% of talk, in which some of them were Pan-African, but more than 360, 180 supreme mathematics talks. Mr. Untouchable says she was on that 5% of stuff. Yeah, she was. I think she still is too. Right. But let me continue with the paper. Let me finish it up. So we are at economics. Economics is the cooperative production and management of goods and services. A systematic nationalist view of economics sees all production and management orchestrated for the benefit of the people. It is everywhere operative. Exploitation through cheap labor schemes, class distinctions, and unfair labor policies are condemned outright by systematic nationalism. An economic system which does not stifle the human personality and which is based upon the historical experience of our people is the acceptable system of economics. Individual initiative should not be denied, but individual ruthlessness must be vehemently opposed. And that's what I was trying to get across many moons ago, and I was talking about we need another word for capitalism, because when we talk about something like this, the idea that individual initiative should not be denied, right? But the ruthlessness factor should be minimized. When we talk about that, a lot of people didn't understand what we were saying. I think it was Oni in the chat who was saying something similar, like you can't just want to give a man a biscuit after he's been innovative, right? After he's shown initiative and change things for the better through thought, through his thought and work, right? Yeah, this is what I'm talking about, right? Don't kill the individual initiative. Reward that, right? Not outrageously, and definitely have a system where you cut down on that individual's perhaps tendency to want to be ruthless. That's what the matron calls that rugged individualism stuff, where you will just be about yourself and cut down everyone around you. We don't want to get rid of that and then throw out the baby with that bathwater by getting rid of rewarding those who show initiative. As a leading contradiction in American society, class exploitation has made it necessary for systematic nationalism to posit communalism as a pragmatic alternative to class oppression. A serious application of systematic nationalism to our social and economic perspectives would revolutionize our community. It must, however, be a committed and persistent application in every sector of the society. At the beginning of the 21st century, African Americans will have transformed intellectual and cultural life as our ancestors bequeath the singular spiritual legacy of the American nation. That's the end of the paper. So this is what we should take away from it. It's economics, spirituality, science, and culture, right? What did you guys think of that paper? What did you guys think of the paper? I'll read your responses to that right after I do this one last station ID break for the night.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron, on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you're checking out all those shows. Harsh Reality Podcast had the Present series. We had the Revolutionary Matron on recently. Check out that interview. Then they dropped their usual the Harsh Reality Podcast with El Miguel and Rai. There as well with W.E.B. Check it out. Check out the Pro-Black Perspectives last episode as well. Right? Check all that stuff out. In the chat, Mr. Untouchable says economics is the rub for all Pan-Africans. Some say socialist economy, and some say capitalist, some say hybrid. The Pro-Black Perspective says too much NOI, but interesting. I kind of see why his students talk like that. He says almost no African-born scholars mentioned. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I mean, that's weird to me. That's absolutely weird to me. There's not a nod to no African scholar. In fact, it's mentioned like, hey, don't try to apply. What was the countries he mentioned? Was it the Congo, Guinea, China? Like don't try to apply that nothing from over there, to the African American situation here. But I find that odd. Mr. Untouchable says, Dr. Molefi Asante is my guy. I think he has a good methodology to his approach. Dr. Asante is an African scholar. KW Dawn is here, saying Sawabuna. Your guys say what's up to KW Dawn. 7. I thought Asante was American. Was African, AA, African in America type thing. Right? The pro-black perspective says, makes you wonder if people in America think people in Africa can't put insight on America. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm talking about. Like there's no African thinkers who can understand the situation here and come up with an analysis. Yeah, that's weird. Mr. Untouchable says LOL. No, when I say an African and American, I'm not trying to lessen the brother in any way. I'm just speaking for full understanding. Is he from the continent or is he from the diaspora? Right? Yeah, I agree with the pro-black perspective. I think the thinking is, and I think Asante shows the thinking of Africans in America is that the Africans on the continent can't figure out what's going on with us. And perhaps that's a part of why we hear this kind of rhetoric that comes out like, yo, mind your business. Stay out of this stuff here. Is it the case that the African in America has a similar thinking? I'm sorry, the African on the continent has a similar thinking? That the African in America can't harness what's going on and have an analysis of it? Mr. Untouchable says, are African Americans willing to accept that analysis from an African scholar? That's what. Harsh Reality Podcast says to the pro-black perspective, honestly, is African Americans won't respect it, especially the youth nowadays. Yeah, as time passes, our youth are seeing themselves as less and less connected to Africa. So why would they want to listen? That's why PA's got to step it up. Time is against you. Step it up. What are you going to do to reconnect and reestablish that connection and get folks that's over here, help to get folks to achieve that spirit? What you going to do? Again, I want to thank you guys for coming through tonight. That was the end of the paper. Just want to remind you guys that tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know what's up. If you don't, make sure to follow me at Bittermeds, BITTERMEDZ, or Z. Follow me on Twitter, and you can participate in the space as well. It's a situation where I'd like to hear from as many people as possible in the space. So if you join, make sure that you raise your hand so that your voice can be heard, your ideas can be heard, right? The topic is Build Black Better Codes of Conduct. And we're going to, I'm going to bring a couple of codes of conduct that I remember from the Black Panther Party, from Neely Fuller, from Nkrumah, etc. And we can dissect those. We could start on a macro level, talking about what are the areas that the code should cover. For example, culture, economics, etc., like we just read about just now. And then, we can come out of this conversation with something, even if it's just those of us who attend, something that we can say we are going to live by going forward. You know what I mean? I don't think it hurts to do stuff like that. So you guys make sure to tune in tomorrow night, join the space so that you can have your voice heard as well. All right, that's it for tonight. I'll see you guys tomorrow night. And of course, I'll be back. We are going to do a Shoot the Breeze on Christmas night. We are going to do a Shoot the Breeze Christmas night. So I'll be here at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Might be a shorter show. Depends on how much prompts we get. But we will be here on Saturday night. I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank Mr. Untouchable, House Rally Podcast, Pro Black Perspective, KW Dawn 7. Want to thank Tito District. Want to thank Jonelle. Want to thank Nefere. And if I missed anyone, maybe someone who wasn't in the chat, thanks to you too for tuning in. I'll see you guys tomorrow night on Twitter. And Saturday night, I'll see you guys here for another episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast, Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze. All right? Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.